KMAN's morning news continues as we welcome Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab to our studios here this morning. Welcome back to Manhattan.
Hey, Brandon. Thanks for having us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you betcha. We're going to be talking about some different topics here, primarily regarding elections. But first, give us a refresher about kind of what took place during the 2023 legislative session with regards to policy and how that's going to be impacting the process heading into the fall and beyond.
Well, we've constantly been getting this pushback, and it's from a minority of voices that are really loud, worried about voter fraud and thinking that Trump got more votes in Kansas than he actually did, which our audits and recounts have shown none of that's the case. And after the recount on the value of them both amendment, a lot of that has just faded away, but it still affects some legislators. And so our biggest thing is we want to make sure that when we do election changes in statute, we're not overburdening counties doing unfunded mandates and things like that. And we were successful, and there were some laws going back 20 years. I remember back when my first years in the legislature in the early 2000s, things we wanted to change, and we just couldn't get anything unclogged. And we just, with everybody, with all the dyspepsia, the horrible rumors on the quality of elections going away because of the recounts, and I'm still having quality relationships in the legislature, said, let's try to get this cleaned up. And so we focused on that. One of the laws that we had on the books, for example, goes back to the 1860s, that if you go to show up at a polling place and there's no poll workers, the voters that are there can elect poll workers to work that election. They did that because Missouri back in the 1860s would kidnap our poll workers because we were going to elect anti-slavery Republicans to the Congress. And they figured if we could do the election, it wouldn't tilt the balance of power. And we don't need that law anymore when we train our poll workers. So it's things like that we needed to get cleaned up. Another issue we had is when you do a bond election, statute says you need to send that ballot out 30 days before the election. Well, according to UOCAVA law, you have to have 45 days for military ballots. So basically our military members, it was difficult for them to get a ballot on those bond elections. And so things like that we cleaned up in statute, and a few others as well.
Well, I know one of the things that we'll talk about here today is the election modernization bill. That got bipartisan support. I was a little surprised to see that. You don't see a lot of bipartisan things anymore, but
it does exist.
It does exist, yeah. What does that change or clean up from an administrative perspective, and how closely does that resemble what you initially had proposed?
So there were some things we had to take out of it because there was for some deadlines and things that we assume are a certain date, but it's not clear in statute. There was some pushback on putting it in statute, so and that's how the bipartisanship happens, is be flexible. The Democrats were flexible with us. We were flexible with a lot of their grassroots organizations that were had concerns. And so anything that looked like was going to be controversial, we took out. And we focused on the things, sort of like the 1800 law that I was speaking of, things like that we thought by and large people would agree with. A real important measure, if you remember during the primaries last year, not only was value them both on the amendment, but we had a state treasurer's race that came down to less than 1%.
Yeah.
And so Karen Tyson, who ended up losing the race, had a valid point. And we tried to fix this in statute before this year. Sometimes you don't fix the problem until the problem occurs. What had happened is you have to give the counties you want to recount in before the Board of Canvassers meet. How do I know which counties I want to recount in if they haven't met and counted their provisional ballots yet? And so on Friday, Karen said, these are the counties I wanted recounted. Well, then Reno County out by Hutchinson flipped from her favor to her opponent, now Treasurer Steve Johnson's favor. She wanted to recount in that county. Well, legally we couldn't do it because they had to be in on Friday, which was unfair to our counties. It's unfair to her. We changed the law to say, hey, after the Board of Canvassers meet, then you can make your request for a recount. And that way, if there's counties that are close, because provisional ballots do come into play, and also they're checking signatures. Is this a valid ballot, or did somebody vote for this person? And that's what the job of the county Board of Canvassers. But you don't know the final count, or if it's close, or if you just flat out lost those votes until after they meet.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. So voters, I assume, probably won't notice much of a change when they go to the poll.
Yeah, and that was our goal. So every time we've introduced legislation, when I first ran in 2018 and got elected and got sworn in 2019, I said, we've had a lot of election changes because we didn't used to have voter ID. We did. We didn't have proof of citizenship. We did. And then we didn't again. And we had all these drastic changes. We want to make sure when the voter goes to vote, nothing drastically changes. That for them it's the same, because otherwise you just kind of depress voter turnout because like, well, I don't even know how to vote this time. Mm-hmm. So we've been successful keeping it consistent for the last 5 years, and we want to continue to do that. Our changes are more on the administrative side, and then just in statute that's going to prevent litigation and also make it more clear. So if statute says it, every county will do it, and it doesn't leave much room for interpretation. And so by focusing on things like that over the last several years, it's easy on the voters. It's one of those things where it's hard for cheaters to cheat, but it's still easy for voters to vote. And that's been our goal. It's not that high of a bar to get to.
We're speaking with Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab here on News Radio KMAN. Coming up next year, the state will participate in the presidential preference primary, which I've started to learn a little bit more about, but I still don't think I'm fully clear on it. Tell us, it hasn't happened since 1992, as I understand. How will that process play out, and what do we need to know?
Well, so normally when we have a primary, for example, we're going to have a primary with local elections this August. Whoever wins the primary, their name will be on the ballot in November. With a presidential preference primary, that person's name may not be on the ballot in November. That's why it's called a preference. So, and I'm not a fan of this because you're spending $5 million to have an election we normally don't have on a date we rarely have. So we're traveling the state, letting folks know, hey, next March 19th after Super Tuesday, we're going to have a presidential preference primary. And it's fascinating to me, and I say this every time I talk to the media on this because it's worth noting. I had a nasty primary last summer. And then I had a general election. And both those individuals criticized the way we do elections in Kansas. They're both now chairs of their respective political parties. They said I couldn't run an election, but then when it came for them doing their own caucus and choosing who their presidential nominee, they're like, Scott, will you do that for us? We don't trust ourselves. So I feel a lot of redemption with the folks who criticize us now saying, well, he does it so much better. We want him to do another one because we don't trust ourselves. I just think that's just so ironic. But that being said, this is your chance to engage in presidential politics in a way that we normally don't. Normally the parties have a caucus. You go there, you hear the representatives speak, and then you vote. Instead of doing that, the state's going to flip the bill for the parties, which, again, as a Republican, I'm not a fan of government paying for things for private organizations to do, but they're going to do it. And then you get to go and you'll vote. And how many delegates that weighs into has not been determined by either party yet. But the election will occur March 19th. So we don't know, do they get all those delegates? Do they get a portion of those delegates? Because it would be a travesty if, after Super Tuesday, somebody drops out and then that person wins Kansas and their rule is winner takes all. Well, that person gets all the delegates, but that person's not even running for president anymore. And then the state wasted $5 million. So, but regardless of the $5 million, regardless of what the rules end up being, this is a great opportunity for voters to get out and vote again.
All right. So obviously election workers will be busy next year.
Yeah, and that's a segue to something I want to add as well, is we need poll workers. And here in Riley County, county clerk here, he does a fantastic job. But we're always, we lose a lot of our elderly every year as they retire. And we never had some come back after COVID. But you could be as young as 16 years old. And listen to me, you young individuals, if you will take a day off school, you will get paid and you'll get credit. I don't know why you wouldn't do this, but if you want to be a poll worker for a day, it'd be fantastic. And it looks great on applications for scholarships or if you're trying to get into a qualified admission university.
Right now, as we get ready for the fall and then eventually 2024, this is kind of a training period for folks?
It really is. This is the type of year where if a county gets new equipment, this is the year we prefer them to test it in because there's less races. We were just in Bunsen County before we came here. The clerk there, Abby, she's super sweet. They only have one primary election this August. And so they only have one advanced voting place in Alma. And so it's a low volume turnout. And it's only people in that area of the district that are going to vote. And so if you're going to try something new, you have the bandwidth to correct it if something goes wrong. Whereas next year in a presidential election year, probably not the best time So young folks, if you want to be a poll worker, this is the one to jump in on. That way you could probably be a poll judge or just learn a lot faster on the fly in a bigger election next year.
All right. Here we're speaking with Secretary of State Scott Schwab here on News Radio KMAN. Now, your office does more than just elections. Let's talk about the biannual filing period for businesses.
Yeah, so this is a law change. It's something that we campaigned on, also got the law to change, but then we came in and found out our computer system was outdated in about 1989. Well, our system is literally on a C prompt still. And there's probably people that don't even know what a C prompt is because it's so old. Well, we will be off that computer system this year. So then next year, especially with the business hub and all the life science business that foster economic development in this region, instead of filing every year, you'll file every other year. So it'll be the same cost. Instead of paying, your fee will double, but you won't have to. You'll get it free next year if you want to think of it that way. But that's going to be less of an administrative burden on businesses, and then we're also enhancing the system so that eventually, for example, you want to open a new restaurant down by campus in Aggieville, let's say, right now you'd file your new business with our office, but then you get your restaurant permit from Ag. You get your liquor permit from Revenue. Then you got to go to Labor to get your unemployment insurance and sometimes your work comp as well. And then if you need help from Commerce because you're a minority-owned business, that's just another silo of government you need to touch. After we get on this system, we'll be able to have a business one-stop where you'll just have a wizard that will walk you through the whole process. And when you click send, all your permits just come to you. And so it's making it easier to start business in Kansas. During the shutdown, we were still doing 84 new business filings a day. Normally we do about 110. We've been spiking over 130 a day. Many people who lost their jobs during the pandemic are creating their own job. And so what we want to do is make it as easy as possible for them to do that.
All right. Well, I know last week also you were appointed the president of the National Association of Secretaries of State. You became the 5th Kansan to serve in that role. Explain some of your duties and what you're hoping to accomplish in the next 12 months.
Yeah, so it's an honor. It's to be chosen by acclamation by your colleagues across the country to say, hey, we want you to lead our association. It is the oldest government-specific association in the country. We're coming up on 120 years old. We will have produced more presidents out of the state of Kansas than any other state has. We've been tied with Minnesota, except for Minnesota will be there next year, so replace me, so we'll be tied again. But it is an honor to be in the shoes of folks like Ron Thornburg, Jack Breyer, Elwell Elwell Shanahan, and some of the great secretaries of the past. But the goal, I think what I'd like to do is try to work with some of these tech companies to do public relations on election equipment to reestablish faith after all the lies we went through in 2020. And I mean, it's been well documented. Even Fox News has admitted to the tune of $750 million that a lot of those rumors about election equipment were just completely fabrications. And so now to redeem that, because it'll erode to chaos if people cannot have faith in their election. And this is where I have a lot of respect for both Laura Kelly and Derek Schmidt. On the State Board of Canvassers, Derek Schmidt's on it. He didn't send a surrogate. He came in himself and signed to certify the election that sealed his loss for governor that he had been working on for 4 years. That's the country I want my kids to grow up on, that when somebody loses an election, they have faith in it, they're willing to put their signature to it and move on. And that's the integrity we need, and not lie about, well, it's this or that. No, Derek lost the election. And, you know, I love the guy. I hated it. I voted for him, but Laura Kelly rightfully became our governor.
Yeah, and of course, you know, faith in elections has been dipping, as you're probably well aware.
Yeah.
You know, 15 years ago it wasn't
a thing. There was some on like the voter ID debate, but even there, voter ID, it instilled the confidence. Like, yeah, we had situations where people would go to vote in a school board election. They never vote in a school board election until their sister-in-law or somebody ran and told them to go vote. And they went to show up and found out somebody voted in their stead at 7 in the morning. But with voter ID, it stops that stuff. And so we have this confidence in our elections. And then all of a sudden there's these snake oil salesmen that are not even from Kansas that come into Kansas and make lies about our system, and they don't even understand it or know what it is. It's frustrating.
Yeah. Well, elections will be here before you know it. And Riley and Potawatomi County don't have a primary next month, but we will have the general election November 7th, and you can go on the county website to find the full election calendar. Of course, that's also available on the Secretary of State's website,
which is sos.ks.gov.
Well, Secretary Schwab, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, sir.